We are pleased to present the International Hydro Diplomacy, Building and Strengthening Regional Institutions for Water Conflict Prevention, pre-conference study commissioned and led by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung with support from the Stimson Center. Policy recommendations for policymakers from Central Asia and the EU. Joint water governance institutions must be strengthened to address the needs and challenges faced by the riparian countries. Policymakers should be ready to make difficult choices in terms of enhancing the effectiveness of joint institutions, but also harnessing legitimacy, trust, and equity. Sometimes these concepts may trade off each other. Broader participation and transparency would enhance legitimacy, but might hamper efficiency of decision-making. To complicate matters further, the role of state sovereignty has to be considered. A supranational authority with rigid enforcement mechanisms may offer the most effective water governance regime, but most likely would not be acceptable to the countries. Since many donors have been supporting transboundary water governance in CA, any increased hydro-diplomatic engagement of the EU should involve donor coordination to generate synergies between the different approaches. Foster basin-wide, cross-sectoral, and inclusive coordination and strategic planning. Despite coordination efforts, so far, policy planning has been taking place in isolated sectoral silos, not covering the full basin, and relied mainly on governmental actors. However, integrated policy frameworks and inclusive processes are a must to enable a long-term, cross-sectoral vision and stable water management. A constant dialogue is needed to align diverging water use priorities and identify trade-offs, agriculture, energy, land use, etc., as well as incentives to foster synergies on national and regional levels. In this context, basin-wide long-term integrated water planning and management is critical in order to foster coherence between sectoral policies and enable more efficient, reliable, and conflict-free water management. Countries can decide whether they want to address the full range of water-related issues in an integrated way or would prefer a stepwise approach focusing on priority water management areas. For example, irrigation and hydropower. There are a number of ways to ensure cross-sectoral integration. For example, Tajikistan is represented in the ICWC by the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources, which covers both agriculture and hydropower sectors. It is also possible to establish a national mechanism for coordinating intersectoral interests, which will then represent all sectors at ICWC. The EUWI NPDs serve as good tools in this regard. To address this issue at regional scale, it may require expanding the ICWC membership to include main sectors such as agriculture, energy, environment, or establishing an advisory basin council. Basin-wide integrated water management requires all riparian countries and relevant stakeholders being involved in decision-making processes. Currently, Afghanistan is not yet a member in IFAS, and Kyrgyzstan suspended its membership due to a lack of attention to hydropower. The opening towards Afghanistan has been discussed for years, and first bilateral steps have been taken. For example, cooperation on hydrological data between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. A nuanced and stepwise approach with specific joint activities and granting observer status might be the most politically feasible initial steps. Moreover, government negotiations are as important for successful hydro diplomacy as informal exchanges and cooperation at technical, scientific, or non-governmental levels. Beyond government officials, integrating experts and other stakeholders in form of an overall basin council or specific advisory committees to the different bodies can enhance the legitimacy and efficacy of IFAS and its functions. The EU should identify drivers for change at all these different tracks and target programs to develop capacities for cooperation and multi-stakeholder dialogue. Special attention could be given to the younger generation as future decision makers, for example, through supporting student exchange programs similar to the Erasmus program and creating room for creative, interdisciplinary, and innovative thinking. Create a clear mandate with sufficient and sustainable capacity and funding for regional water organizations. A clear, unambiguous mandate with adequate enforcement mechanism is needed to make transboundary water governance institutions in CA work. This includes aspects like the legal status of the organizations, their financing, and the jurisdiction of the BWOs over the entire river reaches, access to cross-border posts. It also implies that joint institutions need room to act as independent international organizations and not under tight control of national governments. Policymakers should help to secure hard infrastructure and soft expertise, capacity to address operational difficulties as well as long-term transboundary water management challenges, especially those related to more reliable forecasts, better data and information exchange, and joint monitoring facilities. Addressing the funding and capacity mismatch would also significantly help to improve the governance system. The current financial framework is not fit for the future and needs adjustments. A more equitable, not necessarily equal, contribution to regional cooperation of all basin countries, for example, in proportion to the volume of water used, will help to secure predictable and sustainable finance. Matters related to permanent location of joint bodies and rotation of its staff can be settled only if all countries will commit to providing support and funding. Strengthen homegrown institutions in a comprehensive, coordinated, and context-sensitive approach. It is essential to build on homegrown institutions and regional values and practices that have proven to work. New ideal institutions may not function unless emerged from and embedded in the local institutional setup and culture. The ICWC and its executive bodies were established by the riparian countries based on pre-independence institutions, rules, practices, and infrastructure. While unequitable and unsustainable arrangements require change, this can only be initiated by regional actors themselves with global blueprints bound to fail. In the early 1990s, the heads of water authorities of the CA countries signed an agreement establishing a legal and institutional foundation for transboundary water cooperation in a period of instability, which was later reconfirmed by the heads of states. This leadership serves as a remarkable illustration of personal responsibility of water professionals of the basin. Identifying and supporting agents for change is therefore a suitable approach for donors who want to support homegrown institutional reforms. Due to its presence in the region and its long-standing experience, the EU is well suited to develop a nuanced support towards institutional building which takes the political and socio-cultural context as well as the differences between the CA countries into account. However, it is important to note that water management challenges in CA are very different from those in Europe. Hence, any simple replication of EU's experiences should be avoided. Support research, education, innovation, and unconventional thinking. Policymakers and donors should support research, innovation, and unconventional thinking going beyond traditional approaches in water management and governance. Advancing new technologies and creating innovative solutions demands multi-stakeholder engagement. It will also need investments in the education of the new generation of experts and policymakers, and reforming curricula to equip students with a comprehensive and interdisciplinary understanding of water challenges and adequate analytical and applied skills to tackle them. Policymakers can seek inspiration from such ventures in other basins. For example, US-Mexico experimental measures to rejuvenate the Colorado Delta, or globally, for example, exploring the pathways of the Paris Climate Agreement. CA countries could agree on nationally determined contributions towards transboundary water cooperation, water conservation, and SDG 2030 development agenda.